Does it let me type back? Of course it does. Awesome. Okay, appreciate it. All right. And by the way, I'm not David. I don't know if you saw the difference there, but that's just who the user I'm logged in is, has David's picture on there. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. It looks like everybody's filling in. So my name is Kevin Getch, despite what the screen may say. I am the founder and director of digital strategy at Web4. And I'm really excited today to talk to you about this topic, because it's something that I've seen throughout my almost 20 years experience. It's a consistent theme I see among businesses, among marketers, among communication in general, that can have such a huge impact for you. So my goal today is really to help make you better marketers, help make you better communicators. And a side goal is help you maybe not be manipulated because some of the tactics that I'm going to share with you today and some of the information can be used for good, or it can be used for evil, right? So I think it's important as ethical marketers that we kind of understand the difference and not make sure that all marketing gets labeled as manipulative or something like that, because it's definitely not the case. It's just like saying all communication is manipulative. It's not the case. So I'm going to go through and really dive into some things today. So let's get rocking and rolling. This is my family. It's you know, my reason for being. Love these guys, and our dog Blaze there, who's actually sitting next to me today. And this is my work family. Another group of people that I'm extremely passionate about and that I love dearly, that I get to call my work family. And we have such an amazing team of people, a lot of specialists in different areas. And so when I talk through some of this stuff, it's not coming from one perspective as far as coming from one area of expertise, right? I think a lot of times you'll get points of view that are very subjective to their area of expertise, the type of businesses they work with. I'm going to do my best to provide caveats everywhere and understand that while, you know, I hate it when I see a speaker and they give you a blanket statement like this is true all the time. And so I want to say that throughout the case is there's always varying degrees of this, and why certain things may make sense in one instance, it may be very different in another instance. So I won't get into Web4 too much. My hope is that you already know about us if we're doing our job. But we're, you know, we're Vancouver's award-winning web design and marketing agency, and we're obviously much more than that. We everything from brand and messaging to SEO to design and development to CRO and A/B testing and analytics, so all the things, right? In fact, we won SEO Campaign of the Year award last year for a big project we did with Discover.org, now ZoomInfo. And I didn't mean to turn off my video. Oh, it just might be frozen. Hopefully you can still see me. So the general concept, the general methodology that I want to share with you, I go into a lot more detail in my book that I launched last year, Future Proof Your Marketing. And while the initial purpose was to help businesses not only succeed now, but prepare themselves for a turbulent and quickly changing future, in large part to technology and how quickly it's advancing, the same methodology came in very handy during the global pandemic, during what we're going through now, right? And so I'm going to walk you through this very simple methodology, and then I'm going to point out the two big areas that I think most people, most organizations have a huge opportunity to grow and to improve their effectiveness, improve their communication, and create better relationships with their customers, and just so many different things. So first, I want to touch on this simple methodology, and it's basically just know and love your customer. Right? A lot of what I talk about is You'll see a lot of correlation between human psychology and relationships at the individual level and organizational psychology, because they are very, very comparable in how those work. And one of the number one things that you want to do is know and love your customer. If your goal is to serve your customer, and that's truly your intent, you're already on a great track. And I want to provide a little more context. It's understanding their psychological needs, their behaviors, their customer journey, really, really knowing them, right? So that you can best serve them. And then aligning your strategy around your customer, right? So the first part is all about knowing your customer so you can create the right messaging, so you can say the right thing, you can do the right thing. And then also knowing where they're at. And then aligning your strategy around them is making sure that you get the right messaging in front of them at the right times and places. I try to break it down in a very simple way. Obviously, it's much more complex, and I'll talk about the complexity a little bit more. And then continually monitor, measure, and adjust. You always got to be monitoring, measuring, and adapting, right? We have to meet our customers where they are in the moment. As their needs change, we have to change our needs. You saw many businesses who looked at this challenging event that we've gone through with COVID, and they really stepped up big time and innovated and changed the way they serve their customers, which if they did it in a good way, not only did it help save their business, but their customers are like, they really care about us. They really adapted to meet our needs and really listen to us, right? So I think it's really important. So I want to highlight the two main areas that I see that will have the biggest impact, in my opinion. A lot of people think that they know their customers, that they truly have the intent behind their customers, but they don't understand the deeper psychological aspects of their customers. So a lot of times they're getting information. They might be doing surveys and doing all this stuff to get information, but your customers don't even know sometimes why they're buying your product or service. So if you're relying on them to only that part to tell them, for them to tell you why they're buying your product or service, you're going to be missing the larger portion of things. And I'll walk you through that so that you have a really clear understanding of that. And then strategy. It's funny, strategy is a term thrown around quite a bit, but I'm going to simplify it for you and make sure that you understand. It's like an orchestra, right? All the different pieces have to be working together, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So I love this quote by Peter Drucker. I use a lot of his quotes. He's, if you haven't read his books, he's a great person to get some insights from. But he says the aim of marketing is to know and understand the customer so well the product or service fits them and sells itself. I would update that slightly and say it's to know them better than they know themselves. Because unfortunately, the average person knows their iPhone better than they truly know how they work, right? So I'm going to walk you through and show you how the human operating system works a little bit, so you have some insights into that. And hopefully that'll help you too, like I said, not be swayed sometimes when there is messaging or communication that's more manipulative in nature, so that you don't get caught in that yourself. So I'm going to do a pretty deep dive just on human psychology in general. And I want to walk you through that and just kind of, this is going to, like, for some of you, this, I think for some of you, this is going to be a lot of new information. For some of you, it's going to be like, oh yeah, I did in psychology class in college and things like that. That's really where my passion for psychology is. I had an amazing teacher of psychology, and that was the route that I was considering going down, was being a psychologist. And I've always had a passion for people and just understanding how we worked and why we worked and how we develop ideals and how we, grow as individuals and progress. And so, but I'm going to give you, obviously we could spend literally months and months diving into the information. The amount of information that we'll learn in the future is probably even more. The amount we know about the human brain currently is still pretty little, but it's enough that if people understand it, it will give you a lot more context. So a lot of this is just bringing up stuff you've probably already learned. So understanding the neocortex, right? That's that outer layer of the brain. Lots of times it's referred to as like the rational or thinking brain. There is the limbic portion of the brain. This has a lot to do with emotions, feeling brain, emotional memory, very big in learning, right? So creating new pathways, learning, and a big part of the pain-pleasure response, what we associate pain and pleasure with, which I'll dive in a little bit more here in a second. And then you have what's called the reptilian brain, sometimes referred to as reptilian or the old brain. It's very instinctual in nature. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about how our brain is kind of working against us. This is the part of the brain that is working against us in a lot of cases, but it's also what keeps us alive. And that was truly its intent and purpose, at least from what we can tell, is that, it keeps our heart beating at night, breathing while we're sleeping. So a lot of these things are just instinctual in nature, but it's also responsible for what's called the 4 Fs. That's fight, flight, food, and fornication, right? So these are some of our main drivers as humans. And these are some of the areas that are highly manipulated in media, in some aspects of marketing. All these things are being taken into account sometimes. So this is really, so it could be referred to as the fearful brain. It's all about survival and is this going to hurt me, do something to me, right? So it's much more a self-interested aspect of the brain. I think it's important to give context because most people honestly think that they're logical thinkers, right? Even there's people that are more logical than others, but in general, the actual conscious, rational part of the brain is only 5% of our decision-making processes when it comes to purchases. There's a study done by Harvard. The source is in the slide there. But 95% of the decisions are actually being made in the subconscious area. So it's not actively kind of something we're considering. It's literally being done underneath the surface. And to give you even more context, the conscious brain, that 5% is producing or is processing about 40 bits of information per second. Whereas the unconscious mind is processing closer to, and this is a big estimate right now, but closer to 11 million bits per second, right? So I won't dive so far deep in this, but it's important to understand that so that when you understand that what we're rationally thinking about in our rational brain and that, then there's the unconscious, which is the larger portion that's feeding the conscious. So I'll dive into that a little bit more. And I like to provide this as an analogy that our unconscious, well, in general, we develop pathways. And so our actions, our emotions, our thought processes, all these things is kind of like the water of a river that over time you've developed these pathways. And that's just how we progress, right? That's how we're able to do things and get better and all that kind of stuff is we learn, and this is the system, and it's developed from a number of different things, from who you're born to, the way that they talk, the language, all those things create certain pathways. And over time, our pathways are grouped, right, by this water. So you create these pathways. And the majority of this is all driven by the unconscious, whereas that little boat there is similar to your conscious mind, right? And so if you're in a rowboat on this river, you can use willpower and you can start rowing the other way, but over time, it's going to be really hard to keep up that effort, right? So a lot of times when people think about behavior change, they're focusing in the wrong areas. You have to have willpower, but you also have to change the underlying pattern, which we won't be diving into too much today, but it's important to understand that that's part of behavioral change psychology, understanding cognitive psychology, is that there's associations, there's all these layers of beliefs and core beliefs underneath the surface that build up and create these pathways. So this is really, this is a core idea to understand, and there's something called the exchange sum in every decision. The exchange sum is our subconscious mind is accessing all of our previous representations. As we take in information, we're accessing all of our different associations with all the information it's taking in. And it has pre-assigned feeling and emotion, right? That limbic part of the brain, it's pre-assigned emotion and feeling to different things. And so what's happening in the decision-making process, and as we make a decision, is we are weighing pain and pleasure. And not just physical pain, but associations of pain. Hard work could be associated with pain. That could also be associated with pleasure. Having to do something you don't feel comfortable with could be pain, so all those different things. And if the pain is heavier, has more weighted than the pleasure, we're not going to move forward. It's just kind of how we are. It's not going to happen, right? You're not going to make that decision. If in other ways we associate more pleasure with the decision, we're more likely to go that route. So that gives you a good kind of context, and sometimes referred to as the pain-pleasure principle, and a number of other things. And so that's an important concept to understand, because I'm going to bring that one layer deeper and say, how do we then basically provide additional layers of context so that we can then apply this in our understanding as people to improve our communication, whether it be with each other, whether it be sometimes with ourselves, or as a marketer, and being able to communicate more effectively with your clients and really understanding and making sure we're meeting their needs. So if you take the pain-pleasure principle and understand that, and then you apply it to the human psychological needs, it'll give you a little bit better understanding as you look through and understand your customers, and what psychological needs are you fulfilling for them. So it's very interesting, because I think there's a lot of people who will totally miss this, and they'll never, I don't know if they'll never get it, but they may not get it right away. But once they understand this, it is extremely, it's one of the most impactful things. Not only will this help you be a better marketer, but it could help you be better in your relationship, could help you be better in communication with just people in general, and understanding that. Because once we start to understand that, and actually understand ourselves better too, but once we understand that our customers, one of their psychological needs is certainty and safety, right? And if you did go through psychology class in college, or maybe even high school, there was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Which isn't necessarily just psychological based. It's more of humans' needs, right? So it talks more about food and stuff like that. So that stuff would all fall under certainty and safety. But a lot of times, if we're going through considering a purchase, there's things that are going to drive us more towards associating pain in that area of certainty and safety, and pleasure. Whether it's a secure checkout, if we're just thinking about making an online purchase, right? What things heighten our fear around certainty and safety? Do they have testimonials, other purchases? Are they, legit, right? Do they have a clear return policy and guarantee? Having a guarantee and having clear return policy and good reviews, all these things associate more certainty and more safety. If a lot of their friends have purchased from you, if their brand is well known in the industry, these things all associate more certainty and safety, right? And we can go super deep with this, because it applies differently to every industry in different ways, and it applies differently to those particular customers in certain ways. Then we all have an innate need to feel important. This is why a lot of times technology, which I'm going to talk about this a little bit because I think it's important. I'm a huge fan of marketing and communication. I'm a huge fan of technology. I'm a huge fan of food. But all these things can be bad in certain ways, right? They can be manipulated to be negative for you, get you addicted to the food. Technology is doing that right now in a lot of different ways, and so we have to be aware of that. And it also be very good for you. So it's important to understand that there's a spectrum there, because one of the things right now a lot of technology is doing is focusing on our need to feel important, and the next human psychological need, which I'll talk about as well. So when you look at how whether it be notifications or different things on social media or different things happen, those actually are creating psychological processes in your body that are meeting that limbic system in our brain. And sometimes that's just someone tagged you in a photo or someone did this, right? So they're trying to meet these different needs. And there's some great, there's actually a lot of great documentaries, everything from The Great Hack to Social Dilemma. Is it a Social Dilemma? There's another one on Netflix to talk a little bit more about this. And so some of those things I think are pushing the envelope too far. And if people are aware of how they're getting them addicted to their phone, like if you know, generally speaking, like a lot of people wake up in the morning and they go to the bathroom and it's like, you either checked your phone already or you're checking it in the bathroom. So, right. So it's like, you have to understand how they're using these psychological needs to addict you. Right. And if you do understand that, then it's easier to change and make sure that it's not letting those underlying subconscious drivers be manipulated. So the next psychological need is love and connection, right? So that's another area that whether we're making a purchase or whether we're thinking about becoming, joining a membership, or whether we're thinking about hiring a new company to provide services for us. There's all different ways to do this, right? So a lot of times people might associate love with pain because they've had their heart broken in the past, right? And so there can be these conflicting things where they want love, but they have pain associated with that, right? And so sometimes people focus more on connection. And I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but I think it's important that you understand that behind all of our logic and our decisions are these needs to feel important, to feel loved, right? To have certainty and safety. These are all drivers for what we're doing. And another need is variety. If we woke up every day and had the same exact thing happen all the same time, like Groundhog's Day or something like that, like it would be so monotonous, right? So, you know, God in her infinite wisdom said, hey, we need variety. It's the spice of life, right? So, but it's only when we have variety that we, right? Because if you get a variety that's a problem, you don't necessarily want that. So there's pleasure associated with that. It's like, oh, I have a new, I just got a new package in the mail. It's variety. I got taking a vacation. A lot of people who have higher need for variety tend to be a little bit higher risk takers. They tend to travel more. They tend to do those things. And some people don't like variety as much. They like more structure. That tends to be more closer to the certainty and safety, right? But all of these things. And then progress or growth is another big factor. We all, like there is a human driver in us that it's like we want to continually make progress. We want to continually grow. And like it's one of the reasons why when you're doing a test or going through a checkout process, that if you have that progress bar up top, it's a huge psychological factor. Says, oh, you're 80% complete, right? I don't want to stop the process at 80% complete. Right? It's like, I've already done this. I want to keep making progress. And it actually signals to me, oh, I'm making progress. That's good. And so when you don't have that, you've gone through something and you've like, how far am I? I don't even know where I'm at in the process. Like when I ran a marathon, or I was a half marathon, and I'm thinking, gosh, like, am I almost done? And then I find out I'm only a third of the way through, right? Like, but when you know, it's like, oh, you're this far, you're this far. Those progress, those milestones really help. And then one of the higher psychological needs is, I think, as we adapt, that really is maybe like a higher level, I think, for a lot of people, is impact, right? Is having a positive impact in society, in our community, for other people, in the world, right? So, and that's like a higher level, is to contribute, to have a positive contribution. And that can be tied to a lot of different areas too. So I know that was a lot. Obviously, the last need is Wi-Fi. If we don't have that, all these other ones don't really matter. So that's obviously a joke. So it's not, but so this will give you good context as you think about whether you're designing, whether you're writing content, ad copy, whatever it is, you can understand that you write copy to meet your customers' needs, right? Because ultimately, if we're there to serve our customers, we want to make sure we're serving their needs. And so I need to talk a little bit about the instinctual part of the brain, because if you don't understand this part, then that other stuff won't be able to apply as effectively, because the instinctual brain is very self-centered. And so you have to understand, like, a lot of times people are writing content, they're writing copy on the website, and they're talking about we, how great we are, and we do this, and we do that, and all this stuff. And it's like the self-centered brain is like, I don't really care. I'm talking to you and what we do for you. Then the self-centered part of the brain, it's that instinctual reptilian brain, is saying that, okay, this affects me, because ultimately it was thinking, the brain is really looking at, how am I impacted by this? The reptilian brain is thinking, how is this going to affect my survival or growth or prosperity, all those different things, right? And will this give me pain or pleasure is a big part of it. And so it's important to understand that the instinctual brain is kind of like a child almost, where only certain things only get through to it. So more complex, so you'll see down here, it says simple, more complex ideas and things like that aren't going to get through to the reptilian brain, which is ultimately making the decision. So you can think sometimes that you're creating this whole great complex argument and all these different things that'll make sense, but it's really the simple concepts, the simple words, familiar. And if you have too many choices, you have overload, right? So it's kind of like going to the Cheesecake Factory and you open the menu and you're like, oh my gosh, analysis paralysis, right? So the key there is, don't make me work. Make it simple. Use familiar words, familiar concepts. And then emotion is a huge part that actually gets through, because that's where a lot of those associations are. And it's important to understand that storytelling is such a critical element that it impacts all these areas. That's why story is so powerful, because storytelling does two things. One is it gets behind your bullshit meter. And we all have that rational thinking brain that's saying, this person is telling me this thing, and if you just tell me, hey, this will be great for you, they're like, okay, sure, but you're biased, and I don't necessarily believe you. That's just kind of the way it happens a lot of times. When you tell a story, the person is actually experiencing that story in their minds. They're processing it in their own way. They're going through it visually. They're thinking about maybe some of their own experiences that relate to that. And so it's actually them telling themselves in a way. And so that is why story is so powerful, is because it actually gets deeper into our more emotional aspects of who we are. And it also a lot of times has analogies where we're in our mind, we're creating analogies of your story to our experiences. And analogy is very powerful in that way as well. And then visual. So when I'm showing you the process of 40 bits or 11 million bits, the large majority of that is actually visual. So if you can tell a story, and I'll give you some aspects that apply to design as well, but if you can tell a story with visuals, you can take complex ideas and communicate them in a very simple concept visually and tell a story. That's super, super powerful. And so when you bring all these things together, it's going to have such a big impact. So that's why understanding the human psychology and understanding why we are the way we are and how we operate is so important. And then there's contrast. So contrast, in simple terms, contrast is in a way creating an analogy where you understand it's like the opposite of something, or it really sticks out to you because it's not kind of standard. Contrast is like, oh, these things are all common, and then, oop, this is different. Contrast is different. So it disturbs your complacency. It allows you to see, sometimes there's all this information, and contrast can allow you to kind of clarify something really quick. It's good, it's bad. It's left, it's right. It's up, it's down. It's, all those kind of ideas. And so, media uses this quite a bit, and their whole focus is fear, right? They say if it bleeds, it leads. And unfortunately, until they're trying to optimize for what they're trying to optimize for, and they want to get more readers, they want to get more clicks, they want to do more of this, so they'll use more sensational headlines. They'll use things that apply to this part of the brain. It affects you. It's emotional. It's contrast. It might be, stand out. So these are all things that can be done, that they're doing to say, oh, we know that if there's, and that's why, watching too much media isn't good for you. There's a lot of focus on fear, a lot of focus on other things, which can be negative and unhealthy. Primacy and recency. The important part, I think a lot of people probably understand this a little bit more, but the general aspect is that we remember what happened first and what happened last. We all remember, like, you know, like when I met my wife, right? I remember that story. I remember recent events. Some of the stuff in the middle, not as much. You're not going to remember that quite as fresh in the brain. And so there's a lot of studies done around this too, which I'll give you a quick aspect of. But first, so you, and I'll give you a few examples in advertising that I think are a really good example that use all these things. Michelin, because so much is riding on right? Your tires. So they're focusing on you. They're using contrast, visual, right? Visual storytelling, and contrast between a baby and next to a tire, which is obviously very different, kind of stands out. Very emotional, because they're trying to create that association between your love for your child and wanting to protect them and getting the right tire, right? So there's all these different elements that come into play. And then simple. Simple is so key, right? So it doesn't need to be really big and complex, but here it says stop climate change before it changes you. Very simple, straight to the point, huge visual storytelling, really disruptive from a contrast standpoint, right? It really kind of hits you. And that's what a lot of advertising that you see is more so these days, because we have so much information. They have to do something that grabs your attention. It has to have that contrast where it's really outside of the norm. And so this type of thing is very impactful. This one I thought was, yeah, I mean, I won't wear a helmet. It makes me look stupid. Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful when you look at this and you read that. It's like, that's visual storytelling, right? So there's some different ways. And then contrast, Apple did a good job of trying to create identity around, you know, hey, this is what a PC's identity looks like, and this is what a Mac's identity looks like. And who do you want to be? You want to be the old stodgy guy in a suit, or do you want to be the young, you know, guy? So, right, so they're creating those contrasts there. This is another big one that is from Skittles, right? I think they did a great job on this commercial. It really disturbs your complacency, right? It's like, ooh, okay, what's this? There's a guy milking a giraffe, eating from a rainbow, and he's milking out Skittles, right? Which they're trying to associate joy, basically, with Skittles. They're trying to associate that in your mind, is that this is like happiness and joy from Skittles. It's, you know, but it's still a well done commercial. So in this study on primacy and recency, you'll see how much from the beginning of reading, they would read and they'd basically come back and try to understand what things that they remembered, and what they recalled from what they first read was very high. And as it came to the center, they didn't remember quite as much. And then down here at the end, it was back up again. So that should tell you something in the way you structure content to apply to this as well. And real quick, I want to just touch on, okay, that's a lot of, we just dove into a bunch of knowledge around human psychology, but how do I actually apply this to help, you know, my customers? How do I apply this to help my clients? And so I think we did this 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We created a document. I'm going to share it with you guys today. You can download it. It's a good place to start. It's definitely not the end all be all, but it's a good place to start. And a lot of these terms are thrown around and used in different ways, but what we call the unique value proposition, right? What a unique value proposition should be touching on is, you know, who you are, who you help, how you help them, how you're different, and it needs to touch on the psychological need of your customer. And that's usually one of the hardest parts. It's hard to get this all into a very clear, concise, and compelling short 1 to 2 sentence. This is usually, we'll sometimes refer to it as the elevator pitch, right? So this is, you're talking to somebody else, they ask you, what do you do? It's your quick elevator pitch. What's good about going through the process of developing this is then you can take that and apply it to the next stage. So I'll give you the document here. So we created this. You can download it at web4.com/UVP. And it'll walk you through how do you understand your customer, certain questions, understanding your product, right? Understanding how you're unique in the marketplace, how you meet their psychological needs, and then kind of give you a way to kind of pull it together. So that's a great thing. And you can take that. And if part of that process I wanted to touch on real quick is understanding their fears, understanding their uncertainties, understanding the desires and decision making. Think of fears and desires as like pain and pleasure almost, right? Uncertainties is kind of a little bit on the pain side. It's like, well, I don't know, I just don't know these things. And unfortunately, we sometimes assume in our industries, people know this acronym, or they know this product does this or has this benefit. We make a lot of assumptions, and we need to make sure that we're not speaking to our customers in a language they don't understand. We want to make sure they're getting the full picture. And then how do they make decisions? When you understand these things as part of this process, it allows you to better communicate more effectively with your customer. And then I'm going to give you a template. Basically, it's kind of like a little cheat sheet of how you integrate this into the experiences you create. So you can take that unique value proposition and all the discovery, because like if you do a really deep discovery and pull in all this client information and you use different sources from data that has been collected through multiple marketing that you've done to surveys, to talking to your sales and customer service, to talking to your customers, and you're pulling in all this data and then you're working through it with the context of understanding human psychology, right? You create all that. Now you can use all of that discovery and the unique value proposition, and you can actually create value positioning statements. So often, sometimes going to be your primary messaging on your website and your marketing in different areas. And so this is your basic cheat sheet is pain, claim, pleasure, brain. So are we addressing their pain, right? Because it's really about what is the solution that they're trying to solve. A lot of times people are trying to solve something, they're trying to fill a need, whatever it is, right? And so we need to understand what that truly is. And and it's a lot of times that we think very like, someone who's buying a drill, they say they're not buying a drill, they're buying a 2-inch hole, right? Because they're trying to, that's what they want. They want to create that hole, they need to buy a drill to do that, right? And so certain products are less utilitarian. Certain products like I'm trying to think of that $5,000-$6,000 purse. What's the name of it? Louis Vuitton, it's some of the more expensive like purses, right? Which you can get the same purse for the most part for $50. But when you buy it as a Louis Vuitton, or you buy this, I'm trying to think of the other big brand that's super expensive, but people, what they're trying to do there is they're filling other needs, right? Because that isn't a utilitarian thing like, oh, this is the best purse, I want to do that. It's more for image. It's about feeling important. It could be for them connection. It could be fitting in, right? So they are in a group of people that have this, and that's part of their status. So they want to fit in, right? It gives them safety. It meets those different needs, right? So it's important to understand the psychological needs depending on your specific product or service. They're very different based on each product or service. And so you can look at this and say, what are the psychological needs? What are they experiencing? What kind of loss or frustration or anxiety can we solve? How can we address this? And then your claim is, how do you address that? How are you different than your competitors? What are the specific advantages that differentiates you that can help you stand out? And then how does the customer benefit from it? How are we filling those psychological needs? What are the benefits and the pleasure on their side? What's in it for them? A lot of times I see as you look through someone's site, they're not addressing the questions that everyone asks when they come to their site. And one of the big ones is, what's in it for me, right? And that's where the brain comes in. Are we making sure that our messaging is taking into account the human psychological factors, that we're also talking to the more reptilian brain, right? So are we using you? Are we communicating directly to them when it makes sense, obviously? Is there emotion tied in? Because our decisions, as much as we want to think they're rational, are more emotional than they are rational. Is it simple, or are we making it too complex and hard for them to understand and overwhelming, providing too many options? Do we provide contrast some way? Are we creating an analogy? Are we using visual storytelling? And then primacy and recency, are we addressing the message up, top to grab their attention? And as they go through the process, are we also addressing it again, maybe in a slightly different way, so that they're seeing that recency part, right? Because some of the middle was more filler and they're not remembering that as much. So I wanted to touch on this really quick because I think it's extremely important. At least it's important to me because I'm, like I said before, I'm a huge fan of marketing. I love people in marketing. I think I was helping out, trying to remember her name right now, but I teach some classes at WSU sometimes and do different things there. And there was a student who was wanting just some advice. And so I met with them for a little bit, and they afterwards said, it was really great to talk to you. I always thought digital marketing was so much more just numbers and technical, which there is a lot of that. And it's an extremely important part of it. But there's a lot of the human element there too. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of agencies are missing. A lot of marketers are missing. A lot of businesses are missing is understanding how to balance those things and bring them together. And I think one of the areas, and as I tell you these things, I want to make sure that you're using this in a positive way that is to benefit your customers, not benefit them, right? And so that's one of the big differences between manipulation and influence. And to me, there's really three main things: is intent, authenticity, and benefit between manipulation and influence, right? Because it's a relationship, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with another person, or whether it's with your customer, right? It's all about that relationship and that communication. It's important that you understand what is the intent behind this. And are you being honest and transparent throughout the process? And is it only for your sole benefit, or is it benefiting the customer, right? And so I think from our standpoint for Web4 as an agency, we really focused on on bringing on clients and working with clients that are really focused on doing these things for their specific customers. It doesn't mean that they have to do this for everyone, but they have their niche of customers, whoever their customers are that they serve. And is their intent to help those customers? Are they being honest and transparent? Are they benefiting them throughout the process, right? And I think that's really important when you're looking at good businesses and doing good work. And so I just like to I don't want people to think marketing is manipulative, because good marketing, good companies is not. And I think we've made a huge shift in that direction towards being more authentic, thinking about the entire customer journey and understanding that, it's in our best interest to really focus on understanding the customer, creating a strategy that fills their needs and meets their needs all the way throughout the entire process, and monitor, measure, and adjust. It's the same with a personal relationship. We need to always be checking in and seeing, are we meeting their needs? Do we need to change something? And adjusting, because people are in different positions at different places at different times. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. And to me, this is where the biggest impact comes in, is when you can balance a data-driven approach with a really deep understanding of human psychology. And then if you take all of that, you can implement a really highly effective integrated strategy and create exceptional customer experiences. And I'm going to walk you through a quick example at a high level of how I do that. Just make sure timing-wise, I'm doing good. Okay, I'm long-winded sometimes. So I've seen this to be the case where creating a really comprehensive customer-centered strategy that's part of understanding and knowing the customer and building the strategy around them, right? And making sure it's integrated across channels, tactics, and teams, so everyone is on the same page. We're all rowing, we have alignment, we're all heading in the same direction, right? It can be 10 times more effective, and it's so true, because this is the complexity. This is the reality of the world we live in. Gartner created this, what looks like a New York subway, station, but it's really to address all the different elements of digital marketing, from analytics to data to creative to search and commerce and user experience and all these different things, right? And all these different elements and where they intersect. So it's extremely complex. But if we go talk to a C-level exact and we show them this, they're just like, yeah, whatever. It looks really pretty. What I'm going to show you is how to communicate something in a way that everyone can kind of understand and be on the same page to some extent. When you first have everything outlined around your customer and that's set up to scale throughout the entire organization, so everyone understands the customer's needs, their fears, their uncertainties, and at all the different points in the process, we're working on filling those gaps to meet those needs. Where are we falling short? How can we get better? Right? That's really ultimately it. We're in a process state of continuing to get better and grow. Right? This can apply to a person. This can apply to an organization. That's why I say it applies across the route. And then you have what in the strategies we create, we also look at what we call endorsers. This is media, influencers. This could be your customers, right? This is where we're encouraging them to leave reviews. It could be peers that are mentioning you in another article because you wrote this great thing and they mention it. It could be your vendors or partners. There's a lot of different people out there that might endorse you. And then, of course, you have the community. And to me, the community should be a part of every element of marketing you do. I have a number of reasons why I say that's the case. I think while it is good from a marketing standpoint, I think that shouldn't be the reason you necessarily do it, but understand that that's a benefit as well. You should be, it's kind of like saying it's one of those relationships, right? You have your internal customers, your team, you have your external customers, and then you have the community that supports you, which you should look at that being a relationship that how do you give back? And where do you want to, what mantle do you want to take up and where do you want to have an impact in the community? So once you have all of that, then you start to understand there's the major digital channels. So there's search, there's social, and direct is how I break these down so that it's simple to understand. Search is where someone is out there, they're actively searching for what you offer. They could be looking for your specific brand, or they could be looking for someone who provides your services, right? So a branded or a non-branded type search. And there's a lot of overlap here, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. But the great thing about search is the person is already looking for what you offer, right? And so there's some intent, there's a high intent behind what they're doing. And so when there's a high intent, and I'll give you a couple general rules of thumb here, when there's that high intent and you have a demand, right? So search isn't the best channel if you just created a brand new product or service that no one is searching for it or the problem or solution it solves, right? Because there's just no demand, right? And so you have to work on creating awareness first and creating demand, which there's aspects of search that can be done there, but it's not going to probably be your primary channel. When there is demand, it's one of the highest ROIs. It's a combination of high volume and high return on investment. And then you have social. Social is a great channel. I give a couple general rules of thumb. The more social your business is, the better social media is going to benefit you, right? And I've been challenged on this before and provided examples where it's like, because I'll give a spectrum of, on the side of being very social, it could be like entertainment and events and dining and day spa, like all these different things where it's like, yeah, people want to talk about these things socially and share them socially and share pictures of travel and all these different things, right? That's very social. On the other end of the spectrum is like preparation age or adult diapers, right? Probably not something that's going to be as social that you're going to be like talking to all these people and be like, this is great. Check out these new diapers I got. Sorry. So that's kind of the spectrum. But I always say that, these are rules of thumb and thumbs are meant to be broken. So there's always exceptions to the rule. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. And then you have direct, which is where the customer or you are reaching out directly to one another, right? They could be coming directly to your website. You could be emailing them directly, messaging them, text messaging them, push notifications, in-app notifications. There's all these different ways you're creating direct communication. This tends to be, as long as you're not using techniques where you're creating lists and doing blind outreach and all that kind of stuff where you're doing that, this tends to be farther down the funnel where they've already came in through search or social channels or these other kind of channels, and then you're starting to cultivate the lead and cultivate the relationship through those direct channels. Not always the case, but often the case. Each one of these channels, when done correctly, should greatly benefit the other one. And so let me give you an example. So that I had someone once say, well, how would you do social media for, this kind of out their company. And so I gave them an example, and I said, well, let's say it's, you know, Super Bowl's coming up, and you run this. You've been drinking a lot. You have to go to the bathroom, but there's a minute left in the game, and your team's about to score. What do you do? Depends. So obviously, it has to match with the brand. It has to match with the voice and all that kind of stuff. But there's always creative ways that people can do that have fun to find ways to make it work. It just may not be your primary channel. You have to understand your customer, understand, are they there? Does this make sense? All those kind of things. So there's always exceptions to the rule. So in each one of these areas, you have cross-channel things. You have your website and your app, the content that you're creating, and I say value because the more I communicate to clients, oh, create content, it doesn't really provide a lot of context. So we talk about creating value. And because, you know, how are you providing value to the customers throughout this process? And then how are you distributing it throughout all these different channels? What's the user experience like, right? So CRO and UX apply throughout all these channels. Eventually, your website's going to be a big part of this, and often in the center of all these areas, we're going to be driving back to our website. It's important that you understand your website is one of the only areas that you actually own or should own. If you don't, talk to us, talk to someone quickly, because that is an element that you should own because it's one of your most important elements in your marketing, and it's one of the few that you actually own. That, along with your list of clients, your email list and things like that. Otherwise, you're on rented platforms or platforms you don't have control over. Your brand messaging should be consistent throughout all these channels. There can be variations, but there needs to be consistency. Your PR or reputation management benefit from all these channels and can be used, integrated through these channels to help improve your reputation, help share some of the things you're doing out there that's good, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, measurement. These are things that you need to be measuring all the things, measuring all these channels. And, of course, you have individual tactics in each channel, like organic SEO and paid ads, organic social paid ads, which I'm being very simplistic for the most part. And then you have email, text, chatbots, push notifications, and direct. So this is kind of the context, right? So it takes some of the complexity and simplifies it down. And when I've gone into everyone from a small business to some global enterprises, their strategies look more like this. It's very disjointed. They have a website. They may be creating some content. They don't really have a good search presence, and they don't really know the intent and the different queries the person is using and whether they're informational or whether they're transactional, you know, all the different types of elements. They don't have a good presence. They pretty much have a small keyword market share, and their competitors are often doing better than them. It's, you know, that's why they're reaching out, right? They may have a bunch of social activity going on, but there's no overlap here, meaning that these organizations or companies are in silos, and there's no integrated strategy where people are working together, and the content that's being created isn't being repurposed and utilized and, you know, distributed through different channels. And then there may be some email campaign going out and different things, but it's not really tracked, and we don't even know if the social's benefiting us because they're not using proper tracking techniques. I mean, this is a common theme, and so what should happen is they should have an effective strategy, and I often will change the size of the circle to understand where they should be focusing, right? So in this particular case, this client, there's a big demand for what they're offering in search. People are looking for it. So it's going to be a very high volume and high return on investment channel. So they could be focusing there, doing organic SEO, paid ads, building that out using tactical elements. Anyways, I won't dive too deep in each tactic, but they should be doing social media and direct as well. Every client, in my opinion, should be doing all of these things to some extent. It's just the level of how much they should be doing and what priority and focus they should be putting on it, right? The content that they're creating should be being utilized and distributed throughout these different channels, right? Because what happens is you end up having a customer find you in search, right? So maybe they're here and they found you through search. They come back again, find you through search again, and they decide, you know what? I'm going to sign up for their email campaign or their special offer, or download that white paper that says 5 things you need to know before you buy a home, or whatever it is, right? So now you have a way of communicating with them. They've started to build that relationship, right? You already hopefully tagged them over here when they visited the site so that you can remarket to them, but now you got their email, right? So you send them an email campaign, and in that email campaign it says, hey, follow us on, you know, Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media. So maybe they deepen the relationship again and get into social media, And then because you had that remarketing tag and when they first hit the site, they see another ad that's remarketing to them. So they come back to the site, do a little more research, and then ultimately they become part of your community, and the goal is to have them become a customer, right? So what happens is this is like the center of gravity, and the more people interact with you in the different channels, the closer they come to the center of being part of your community, being an endorser of you, and becoming a customer. And then the goal is, most marketers think their goal stops there, right? The sale or the, or the lead, right? It doesn't stop there. Great marketers know that it's the entire customer journey. And one of their best channels is current customers who have become brand champions. So this is what we call brand champions, because if you are authentic in saying, hey, these are the needs that we're going to meet for you, and then you deliver and you meet those needs, and then you have a good plan working with that to say, hey, getting them to fill the top of the funnel for other people who may be people that you can serve as well. There's going to be some of the best marketers out there for you, right? And so this creates this very positive spiral of marketing, of taking care of your customers, making sure that you're meeting them throughout the entire customer journey, and then they're having a great experience, so they're out there marketing for you. Whew, that was a lot. I just wanted to touch on this too, because I think it's so important, is measure, monitor, and adjust. Whether it's your messaging, whether it's your customer satisfaction, whether it's your analytics, whatever you're doing. Again, another quote from Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed. So we want to make sure that we have proper measurement principles in place. This is common, again, from small to global enterprises that have their attribution and measurement methods not set up correctly, giving them bad data. And if you have bad data, you're making bad decisions. So what we want to have is good data, and we want to measure those things properly. So we can see, hey, this messaging is resonating better with the customer. How can we apply that throughout the entire organization, throughout our entire team, vertically, right? So we have this information now. We can apply it vertically to sales and customer service, because we're in marketing. We're learning that this messaging is much more effective in resonating with our customer, right? And then you have call tracking. What channels are driving different leads, right? Who's calling, and what are the quality of those leads? So it's not just about quantity; it's also about quality. You can see that, oh gosh, we got 50 leads, but it's like, how many of those were quality leads? So closing that attribution gap and being able to understand the quality of those leads is hugely important. It's much more complex for a lot of people to be able to integrate all these things with like a CRM and tracking lifetime customer value and all those kind of things. But it's extremely valuable, because if you know customers from this area are worth 7 times as much than this area, well, then I need to understand where my budget is going, right? Because I want to be effective in using that budget. Of course, there's Google Analytics. I'm hoping you guys have a good understanding of this. It's not a deep dive in analytics, but you can understand which channels are driving conversions, organic search, direct referral, how they're overlapping, right? So this helps represent these channels are working together, right? Organic and direct are working together to create those conversions. These people in this area came through both channels. This came through all 3 channels, right? And then it's very important, and this is an area I see a lot of people fall down on, is understanding that every business has 2 customers, their internal customers and their external customers. You need to be measuring satisfaction and having a feedback loop in place for both. Not only should you, like if you're measuring this, it lets you understand what's working and what's not, so that you can do more of what's working. You can get feedback and you can implement that, right? So you have different feedback. Office Vibe is a great tool for internal feedback. We utilize that for our internal team members. And then we also have our own tool that we reach out and check in with our customers to see, hey, how are we doing? And if there's constructive feedback, honestly, that's some of the most valuable, because if we don't know, we don't know. So we want to get that constructive feedback, but we also love all the positive feedback, helping drive reviews and all of that as well. So I know I went through a lot. I will open it up for questions. If anyone has questions, you can throw it in the Q&A. Man, I finished just a minute before noon, which was my goal. So I know I was probably talking kind of fast, but my email obviously is right there as well. So if you have questions or want to connect on social, I am not super active on social, but so don't send me messages through there. But you can email me or reach me online. So I will keep it open for a couple minutes if anyone's typing in a question. Otherwise, we will wrap up here in a second. I appreciate having a great turnout and everyone showing up today. This is awesome. I hope you guys got some value out of this. I'm hoping you can apply it and understand how it basically can impact any part of your marketing from, thank you, Linda, I appreciate it. From your copy, the content you create, to design elements, to the customer experience as a whole. I think it's really important that you understand how it applies to all those different areas. Hey, Bill, good to see you. Thank you, too. I appreciate it. All right, so there's a question from David. David Portney, my good friend. Good to hear from you, bud. Given that decisions are made unconsciously and our conscious mind comes behind thinking and decided, what's your opinion on customer surveys, and ask the customer what they think or want? So that's a great question, and I'm going to put it in the questions there, but I'm not going to type it. I'll just answer it live. So there's a couple different things here. One is I think surveys are still very valuable, extremely valuable, and should be utilized. But I think it needs to be understood in context with what it really is, right? This is the customer telling you based on a set of questions that you gave. Those set of questions are obviously providing them direction in a certain way already, especially if it's multiple choice, right? So you're already kind of guiding them down the path a little bit. So you have to understand all the biases that kind of come into play with doing those types of surveys. And they are highly valuable for a number of reasons and can be utilized in so many different ways. So I would definitely suggest still doing it. I like someone who has a deeper understanding of psychology, who can also do interviews with some of your brand champions, is one of the things I like the best, because you can get really deep in and understanding and getting some confirmation of assumptions a little bit, right? Because there is so much, there's a lot of science, but there's also a lot of art behind this. And so that's a big part of it, is really like having those one-on-one conversations and really like listening, and not just listening for what they're saying, but listening behind what's the thing behind what they're saying. You know, people don't always come to you. Well, they aren't necessarily coming to you for the reason they think they're coming to you. So they might be coming because they want to take a trip, but they, you know, have a deeper need that they're filling by doing that trip, right? So it's there's a lot of different ways. So long answer, but let me see. And then one other question. And if I didn't answer your question or you have follow-up questions, let me know, David. But Bill, so maybe a bit in the weeds. That's my favorite place to be, Bill. So could you offer a snapshot of best practices for link generation? Do you guest post links have any value for rankings? I love it. We're getting into the more technical SEO standpoint. What's funny is we just did a whole lunch and learn yesterday. And one of our SEO specialists was talking about the best practices for link generation, and we called them gold, as he referred to them, was gold dust shooting elephants. You know, these are sites. So I'd say there's a spectrum here. Super important to understand. There's a big spectrum that applies differently in different situations. There's quality is a lot less important than quantity, as you well know. But relevance and authority, and so we have EAT, right? So expertise, authority, and trust. If you have a site that has those things and relevance that's linking to you, that is, I'd say, one of the best practices you can get to is someone who gave you editorially given link because you created some high value content, or because you have, oh, Randy says magnificent gold dust spraying elephants is what he was referring to them as. So if you have a site that has high expertise, authority, and trust, that is highly relevant, and that gives you a link because of it's editorially given, because they're like, hey, they created some great value, or here, this is a great resource, right? And it's in context on a high value page. I mean, that's going to be one of your highest value things. So one of the highest elements, what's funny about highest elements, is being a great business, creating tons of value for your customers, understanding who your endorsers are and what type of content that they link to, right? So endorsers, whether it's a peer that is like, hey, I remember I created a piece of content that I had a lot of different people in the SEO world all linked to, because they're like, part of it was I got to it quick, and I kind of announced this new feature or thing that kind of came out with Google My Business, and a lot of people linked to it right away, but I also engaged them and did a number of other things. So link generation is as varied as marketing is, right? So there's so many different tactics. I could use different campaigns to create amazing content and then market that content by getting it in front of the right people. Part of that is having segmented lists and then creating lookalike audiences where you're getting that content directly in front of the media, because you have a segmented list for all those media types, right? It could be becoming a contributing author, which you had a follow-up question is, do guest post links have any value for rankings? And they do. I think there's a lot of different levels of value. So the first one I gave was probably the highest level, but if you are a contributing author on a site, actually I just got published on Forbes today for it was a little roundup of questions, and people were asking some best practices around content, and they used one of my quotes, and so they linked to me from that. That's considered kind of like a guest post in a lot of ways, and so that definitely has value, not only from two ways. One is understand, is the audience applicable and is it relevant, right? Yes and yes, right? So that could drive traffic, but it also is providing a ton of value because my audience is there, they're potentially coming to the site, and then it's relevant. So the relevance of that link pointing to me is driving more relevance around the topic of content strategy, marketing, etc. So I hope that helps a little bit. Anyways, I could go on about this all day, so I'm going to cut that one short. But David, I really appreciate the kind words. I love it. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate it. Thanks, Bill. If there's any other questions, I'll stay on for a minute or two, but otherwise we'll start to wrap things up. I'm happy to follow up questions later as well. Great presentation, great questions. Yeah, I really appreciate all you guys. All right, I think we're wrapping things up. So with that, I am going to bid you adieu. Thank you so much, guys. Oh, hold on. No, you're welcome. Just thanks. I really appreciate the kind words, everybody. All right, well, have a great rest of your day, and we're going to go ahead and stop the presentation. Thanks. Bye.